Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. Today's topic is the future of clean tech innovation, and we're joined by Yuri Horowitz, CEO of Sol Systems, Kate Henningsen, co-founder of Arcadia, Jason Dodier, co-founder of Grain Ecosystems. Great to see you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks so much.
Ken.
Well, listen, right out the gate, want to kind of level set, right? Like we have three amazing companies that you guys are all leading. It's a exciting, but also kind of complicated ecosystem in the clean tech space. So I'd love for you each to kind of maybe do a quick round robin, tell us your role, like your leadership position at each company and where you fit in this ecosystem. Maybe we'll start with you, Kate, and we'll do a quick, round robin here.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much for having us. So we are a Washington, D.C. based software company. So Arcadia started 8 years ago. And what we do is two things. One is we've created a data platform. So we're going to talk about how energy data can really start to revolutionize this sector, bring more innovation, really launch the modernization of the energy sector, which is one of our last huge global sectors to really come into the digital age and leave analog into digital. And then we also use the platform to do a direct-to-consumer business called community solar. So that's probably not a familiar term for many people who are in energy, but community solar is a shared solar array that then community members can subscribe to and get savings. And it's actually the fastest growing solar sector in the US, buoyed by the IRA. We have a lot of good growth in there. And so we manage about 400,000 customers on our direct-to-consumer arm as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's go, Yuri. How about you? Also DC based, which is great. All the powers in DC, right? This is
yeah, right about 2 blocks from the White House. And we know Kate's company very well, Arcadia. We respect them. It's a great organization. So Sol, we created the company or founded the company about 15 years ago, which makes us ancient in the industry. I'm a co-founder. I founded the company with my college buddy. We were in track together, a guy named George Ashton. Our business focuses on very large customers and enabling them through their sustainability journey, and specifically around procuring renewable energy. And so we have a few different types of work that we do. We do large scale solar projects, so big solar projects out in the field. We do rooftop solar. We also invest capital on behalf of some of these companies into solar projects as well. And we have sort of an array of businesses that we offer them. And you use the word ecosystem. We think about this industry as an ecosystem. And that array of options for our customers enables them to achieve their journey thoughtfully over time. Our customers include Microsoft and Google and FedEx and Walmart and many of the other companies. And so as they evolve their strategies, we're evolving the way we work with them.
That's amazing. So you must be a little busy these days. Jason, how about you? Tell us a little bit about Grain and then also, previously where you were beforehand and the connection with Schneider.
And I'm thrilled to hear the word ecosystem because obviously it's in the name, Grain Ecosystem. And we're essentially on the other side of Sol because we're early innings. So Grain is essentially a spin out from Schneider Electric Ventures, coming out of a Dare to Disrupt challenge that was put in place globally for identifying the next billion-dollar line of business within Schneider. So prior to Grain, just for some context, I spent 14 years with Schneider Electric in a variety of roles, living in Middle East, in Europe, helping to stand up some of the work we do around access to energy. So going to different marketplaces and identifying ways to improve education, access points, distributed energy. And I did a lot of work on standing up microgrids and working on accelerating efforts with joint ventures in energy as a service. But Grain is essentially on the flip side. We talk a lot about avoidance, but looking at removals. How do we accelerate carbon dioxide removal projects? So at Grain, we're the TurboTax for carbon offsets. And our goal, Ken, is to help project developers turn their trash into treasure. And we do this through accelerating the process of things such as eligibility. So what's the right methodology for me today? There's some big standards bodies that are out there. American Carbon Registry is one of the bigger ones. Puro Earth, Climate Action Reserve, Vera. We do GHG calculation to determine net sequestration, and then ultimately look at project profitability and how you should think about your project from an economic viability perspective. So sources of capital. We want to help avoid tragedy of the commons situations that's going on right now, where investors are sitting on the sidelines waiting for prices to drop, but we need money being invested in the form of, it could be carbon credits, debt, equity, forward contracts to accelerate opportunities in the market. And one last thing that we see today is if you think about the voluntary carbon market, it's a $2 billion market roughly today. The market within that market is about $170 million is carbon removal project opportunities. So we're looking to accelerate that forward to get to at least 500 million metric tons of removals as quickly as possible.
And diving a little bit on that, like how is removal done, like physically? Like what innovations are you seeing out there? I mean, is it subterranean? Is it just credits? Is it planting more trees? Like I think it's worth like just a little bit just thinking through like the mechanics of it, right? Because you hear that kind of stuff, but it's like, what does it mean in practice?
Yeah, so in practice, essentially, when you think about removals, you have nature-based and you have technological sequestration. The nature-based type of solutions, some of these have been around for thousands of years. If you think about biochar, leveraging the Earth's natural carbon sinks, oceans, some folks that are listening in may be familiar with mangroves and sea kelp and algae type solutions. So we're heavily focused there, but you also have enhanced rock weathering, geological sequestration, direct air capture. And from an economic perspective, think about this. A lot of folks have heard about what's happening with Project Orca in Iceland. There's been around $15 to $20 million invested in that project as a direct air capture project, but it's only sequestering 4,000 metric tons of CO2 a year. So that's why it's really, really paramount to look at how do we accelerate nature-based solutions, and in particular, how to lean in on the solutions that have the fastest time to delivery. And time to delivery basically means time to sequestration. So from the moment you start producing biochar, on average, it's 5 months until you're actually sequestering the carbon. And there's a level of permanence that's critical. You need a level of, hundreds to thousands of years of permanence. And people and companies are looking to procure credits, Ken, that have high levels of permanence and integrity and transparency. And again, that's part of what we're looking to do as part of the circular economy story that grain plays a role in.
Yuri, I'd love to get your thoughts on what Jason just mentioned, but then also, you have been doing this for a little while, right? Like, you're a veteran in this sector. Like, how have things evolved? Like, are we, here in your cycle? Are we here?
Mhm.
How do you feel the private sector, is really responding to what Sol has been working on?
Well, first, just on Jason's business, what he's doing is really, really critical. We don't work in carbon credits. We will. We're moving in that direction. And Jason, you and I should chat about that afterwards. But the integrity of the system is ultimately super critical to ensuring the system itself works. Any market-based instrument, any market-based policy will have critiques on it in terms of, are these people greenwashing? Are these people really doing anything? Are the economic investments they're making creating change? And so, Jason, I applaud you on the work you're doing. We did similar work when we started in 2008 around RECs and SRECs, and are doing that work today actually with many of the corporate customers we have, which is how do you build integrity around the system? Ken, to your question, which was, what does the environment today look like from an operating perspective or from a practitioner's perspective? And I'm sure Kate has her perspective as well, but I think it's sort of the best of times and worst of times, right? What worries me is the political, there was actually a New York Times article just yesterday or the day before, the political element of what we do is becoming increasingly challenging, in that renewable energy is becoming a hot potato for political discussion. And where we need to improve as an industry, all of us, is ensuring that the narrative around renewables is about economic development as well as ecosystem restoration. It's about jobs. It's about U.S. jobs, U.S. industry, U.S. communities. Because frankly, the work we're doing, most of it's taking place in rural communities throughout America where, frankly, the folks aren't voting for Democrats. They're not voting for the policies. And yet the economic incentives are driving economic development in those communities. And we need to do a better job of telling those stories because, as I said, best of times, worst of times. Best of times, IRA passed, lots going on. Worst of times, it's getting really, really challenging to build renewable energy infrastructure, in part because people need to do a better job of integrating that infrastructure into the community, and in part because it's becoming such a politically divisive issue. And that's true in our industry, building very large projects. It's true with Kate's industry, building community solar projects. So it's something we all got to address.
Interesting. Kate, love to get your sense of, best of times, worst of times, and also a little bit on kind of, I think you've been primarily focused on the residential side, but also doing a lot more on the commercial side, and now also a little bit of a global expansion in India. I'd love to kind of hear the trajectory Arcadia's on.
Yeah, I mean, similar, some of the themes that Yuri mentioned is, so we're doing sort of a smaller segment, the niche segment, a newer segment of the solar development. We're still software, but we're helping developers subscribe these projects to individual residential. And we've seen some really interesting coalitions come together in these early days. And so, for example, in Wisconsin, where they're about to pass community solar, the people who are introducing the bill are actually, fairly on the right side of the spectrum, because it's about choice and retail choice and giving the consumers choice of power. And, we also have farmers who are in the coalition because it's a way to use land. And so we've actually seen in these early days of community solar some very interesting, and then, you take it to Massachusetts and it's more of a clean energy play, but there's been more of a mix. And I think Yuri said this too, of a lot of these projects are going to be built. A lot of the renewables are going to be built and already have been built in what we would consider red states. And so how do you tell the jobs story? How do you tell the retraining and hard hat story that I think is super hopeful? I love electrification, the idea that the IRA is going to pump billions of dollars into electrification, and your HVAC truck rolls is what's going to save the planet. And there's so many interesting stories I hope we can tell about. What is exciting to me is like the F-150 is going to be an electric vehicle, right? Like we are now past the stage where it's a latte liberal story. Like you have HVAC installers and F-150 truck buyers who are really going to make the decisions that change the country. And I think there's so many stories that we hopefully can tell soon and sort of demonstrate that this, and then to add on, this also means this is a economic retrofit. So one of the numbers I love to say is McKinsey quoted that $100 trillion is going to go in to decarbonize the global society. This is the biggest economic opportunity of our lifetime. I mean, I feel in this business, we've been doing this for I've been doing this for 8 years. We are at 5%, I think, of where we're going. If you think about sort of the $100 trillion that has to come in to really change, it's bigger than the after World War II, that sort of economic revival. And so it very much feels like we're just starting, and that there's a long good way to go. That it's gonna have pushback. I take that, but hopefully people will see that this is an economic opportunity, not a purely environmental opportunity as well.
No, I think that's worth kind of like, spending a couple seconds on here, right? This isn't, none of you are running a nonprofit focused on environmental sustainability. You all have private sector companies that are generating revenue in a sector doing amazing work. And we had a conversation last year with Jigar Shah, and obviously acclaimed solar innovator. He's leading the loan program office now. And part of the narrative was just like, this is a business. This is an opportunity to really take advantage of like doing good work and also be on a trajectory, financially to innovate and hire. What are the challenges there? Is it kind of a communication thing? Is there a talent gap? Like when people go to get their MBA, right? Jason, you spend time at Georgetown now. Like, do people know enough of the opportunities that they could be, instead of going to Merrill Lynch, they could be coming to Grain or Sol and so on? I mean, is that story not getting out there enough? Like,
I've seen just in the last couple of years, we're, just very anecdotally, like there's a different crop of folks reaching out to me to want to get into climate. So 8 years ago, I'm a former lawyer. So I had a lot of former lawyers who were like, hey, I want to do something. Now I get product designers and, people who've been in technology and worked at Nike. And it's to me, this is where I get a lot of hope that we're at the beginning, because you really see everyone wanting to come into climate. And my pitch is, I also often pitch, like, for women, this is a great way. You have an impact economy and you have a growth economy. Like, what an amazing opportunity for, women to go into business and ride the wave and also make an impact, which I think. So I think a lot of new people are coming into the sector in a way that I haven't seen 8 years ago.
And Ken, to dovetail on that too, to Kate's point, I think I was telling you this when we were chatting earlier, in the removal side of things, where solar and wind and storage and microgrids were about 10 to 15 years ago, you have similar structures in place. Like if you think about, all right, multiple on invested capital, what's my internal rate of return, opportunity cost of capital, that's a big part of it. You have to look at deals and you have to present it in a form factor that people can digest and understand. I think even to Kate's work, like think about Arcadia, they're at the forefront. You think about water treatment. Well, guess what? Think about economic viability. You could take biosolids as waste matter, turn that into biochar or bio-oil or wood vinegar or syngas and provide heating and cooling. And those are economic incentives that could, whether it's a public entity, it's a city, or it's a private sector opportunity. So that's the way you look at it. In the removal side, I would just say to folks that are interested in this space, think about the key metrics. It's always the 5 big risk factors. I saw this in microgrids too: supply chain, technology, eligibility here, and that includes offtake, not just eligibility of the methodology, but do you have an offtake agreement in place for the output? And then on the carbon project side, revenues from offsets, because that's a huge part of the marketplace. And then always execution risk in terms of the team. And then if you're doing some other types of development, in the case of a removal project, the development of the carbon credits and the sale of those credits. So I just wanted to add that into what Kate said, because I think there's a lot of these critical elements around commercial structures that are the same. They just need to be adapted to different types of technologies and applications.
Interesting. And Yuri, from your perspective, I mean, are you getting the talent you want and need? Are you seeing a more diverse background of folks? So is there a gap in what we're doing from an educational standpoint in this country about not really investing in the education opportunities for the future? I mean, I think that's something we love talking about.
We get great talent, and we always have, but I think it used to be sort of self-directed, unique people that wanted to go into this industry. I remember I was in law school as well, Kate, and I had a professor. I said I wanted to study the law and then use the law to leverage my passion, which was a passion for the environment and doing renewable energy. And he said, you should quit law school. And I'm so glad I ignored him. Because I think at that time, we didn't have the economy we have now, which is an economy where we direct private industry and a way of thinking to public issues like the environment and sustainability. And we are mobilizing capital, and we are mobilizing a mindset of creativity and entrepreneurship to address significant societal changes. Where I think we are falling short and where we need to continue to work and where we are very focused is are building pathways. Kate, you mentioned this is an economic opportunity like we haven't had. We totally agree. I often refer to this as sort of like what we did in 1938 when we built infrastructure through rural America under the Rural Electrification Act and electrified, I think, 80% of America. That's what we're doing now. We're rebuilding our infrastructure. We want to make sure that folks that have historically not been able to participate in some of these economic revolutions are participating. And that is a complicated mission, because it is in large part we focused on on urban environments and communities of color, and those are really important, and we continue to focus on that, and that's been a central part of the work that we've done with our corporate customers. It also includes rural under-resourced communities as well, and some of those communities are disproportionately impacted by climate change. So we're focused on both those, and I think that's actually what makes us America, is that kind of mismatch. Like, it's beautiful, it's weird, it's all the things above, but it's a tapestry. And so, we're focused on getting those folks more involved in our industry and benefiting more and more from the work that we do.
That's great. Kate, talk a little bit about electrification, right? Like, why is it so hard? I mean, isn't it,
There's a lot of it, right? I mean, I think the estimates of sort of like it's 2 billion machines to retrofit. And I think you need to be pretty, systematic of how you do it. But, in the US, at least, the IRA is supposed to help that, unleashing thousands of dollars of tax credits for everyday Americans. And then what we're excited about, so the other side of our house is we're a data company. We have a platform, a software platform that provides basically energy data for either businesses or customers to use in a different way than they've been able to before. And what we're really seeing is a lot of new innovative business models around a whole chain of the decarbonization. So, it's EVs, it's solar, we can talk about all those, but on the electrification side, it's new business models around showing people the incentives to electrify, helping them get quotes to electrify. And then once we have all these smart machines and your EV, you have this really potentially decentralized power system. And so the grid starts to change, energy starts to change. And that's really, electrification is a key component of us having a more decentralized and stable and resilient grid as we can then start to use homes as power plants, which is kind of the future of where energy is going. So I think electrification is hard because it's big.
Yeah.
What's great though is that these are decisions that people make all the time. You have to buy a car, you have to buy a furnace. And so normally people don't think about energy. This is what we've, really beaten our head against the wall for 8 years as a company that does a lot of direct to consumer is energy is not a normal commodity that people optimize or think about because the system hasn't allowed it, right? You live in Washington, D.C., you live in Virginia. I can tell you who your power company is in a way that that's just not most consumerism. But electrification is kind of, I think, the door that opens that makes people take part in an energy revolution, maybe without knowing it or without needing to understand what we're doing. But I think that's both exciting, but also a big task.
Interesting. Jason, let's piggyback a little bit on that thread on kind of the technology and the innovation, right? Like every conversation I feel like we're having lately is about artificial intelligence, right? Like how do you see AI and new technologies kind of, supporting expansion and growth and kind of access to kind of new technologies? Is it something you're looking at or thinking about at all? I know it's catching you.
It's a critical topic. I mean, and to the point, I mean, I've spoken at 3 universities in the last month, Georgetown, one of them, and it was packed with students. And there was a lot of dialogue. Actually, I spoke on a panel with one of the founders of Flow Carbon, and they're accelerating the blockchain, creating tokens and helping to finance removal projects. I think that, to steal an Einstein quote, right? Imagination's everything, but it's the preview of life's coming attractions, but you have to do it in a responsible way. I look at, all right, when we think about those things, data, AI, machine learning, we have to look at it from the lens of, all right, what are our net zero goals? What are the guidelines that are in place? What are the tools and the frameworks we have to get there? And I think that if you look at it from a circular economy perspective and using all of the potential inputs that you have at your disposal, those are tools that I think are invaluable because in the removal space in particular, it's imperative we're deriving as much data as possible. Part of the vision for Grain is to be able to right size solutions so that a project, because there's a big technology miss, both in terms of what's the best technology based on a certain type of feedstock. So in the world we operate in, particularly with biochar, could be pistachio shells, it could be woody biomass, which is what acts as tinder boxes for forest fires. You want to clean that stuff up and you can create this output. So the better we are with data and leveraging data on our platform, we can provide optimal solutions based on the source, and we can help look at the economic viability of those solutions to move them forward. And the other piece, and I know we're going to dive into it further on in the discussion, and what Yuri was saying earlier is this hot potato on the political side and the narrative around the ecosystem restoration. How are we going to leverage the IRA and the different pieces and subsets within that to fund some of this innovation? Because what I loved in my work on the distributed energy side and working at the time on the biggest public-private partnership and microgrid in the country was about security was at the forefront. JFK went into effect with the microgrid predominantly because of Hurricane Sandy that hit here. But how do you, and the big thing, I'll close on this topic on that was, you had over 70 subsystems that you had to turn into a unified operations system at that airport, with the microgrid and the microgrid control system acting in a critical capacity to determine when you pilot on and off grid. So those technologies are pivotal as well. So they all go hand in hand. And I think data and AI will play a pivotal role in the technologies that are going to drive us forward to achieving our mandates.
Well, let's pivot a little bit to government, right? And Yuri, I love your kind of best of times, worst of times kind of narrative. And I think with government, sometimes it's like you're getting the best solutions and then you're also having like the worst roadblocks, right? So talk a little bit about what you're loving that you see from government and then some of the challenges, right? Like to piggyback on Kate, right? Like I've worked with some solar clients and you go into a county or a state and it's like, this is the utility and they're the roadblock and you can't actually offer what you want to offer, right? And I think people don't appreciate some of the kind of state and local obstacles that kind of come up at the same time you have like the Inflation Reduction Act and like the Loan Program Office and billions of dollars of like capital available, right? So talk about what you like that you see from government and some of the challenges you've seen over your career so far, Yuri.
Well, just very kind of concrete examples. The IRA was amazing, and the Infrastructure Act were amazing for our industry. They have mobilized and will mobilize billions of dollars of capital to ensure that we transition to renewable energy and onshore much of the technological development and fabrication of the very renewable energy technologies we're using. So
CHIPS Act, et cetera, right?
that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, but trackers, which are the things that the solar modules stand on top of,
Sure.
stand on top of the modules themselves,
Sure.
the wiring, all of that, a lot of that, not all of it, a lot of it is being brought back to America to generate jobs and help invest in industry and technology in America. That's great. Where we're, and that's been very beneficial for our company and for others. Where we are struggling is around interconnection. So the serpents sort of under the sea for renewables are NIMBYism and permitting on a state-by-state basis, the political dynamic we mentioned, and then interconnection, both at the distribution and transmission. We have to invest billions and billions and billions of dollars. We are rebuilding a grid that is largely 50, 60, sometimes 70 years old. And we have to do it quickly and we have to do it thoughtfully. And the challenge we have is, and many of the people that object to some of this infrastructure are people that I am aligned with in terms of core values.
Sure.
But the environmental movement isn't always good at saying yes. We're really good at saying no. We've developed a lot of, and I studied RCRA and everything else in law school. We're good at saying no. We have to, as individuals, recognize that in order to achieve the sort of the net zero carbon future we want, we've got to get good at saying yes. And there are going to be challenges with that. And what are those trade-offs that we're comfortable with? And so there's an array of perspectives on that, and I share mine, of course. But some of that comes down to enabling new transmission and distribution infrastructure. Transmission being long, high voltage wires where we ship our electricity out over long distances. Distribution being more localized, connected to your home or to a factory. And we have to build renewable energy infrastructure on both of those. So that's a big challenge, and I think the government needs to get better at fast tracking that, specifically in the East Coast in an RTO called PJM, which for most of you listeners is going to be gobbledygook in a different language. But for those of you that are in the energy infrastructure, that means basically from Ohio over to New Jersey.
Got it. And I love that quote behind your head. I think kind of ties right into a lot of what we're talking about, right? What does that say? Connectivity in the
Nature, nothing exists alone.
Okay.
Yeah. All of our rooms in our office are named after people that we admire.
That's great. Kate, what do you think? I mean, you mentioned IRA a couple of times, like, what are some nuggets in there that you love and you're excited about? And what are some things in like brass tacks implementation, right? Like I have a big kind of theory of the case here, like when the rubber hits the road, there's gonna be like a lot of obstacles here, right? Like people see the dollars, and then to Yuri's point, we go out there sometimes and help clients try to find the real estate, and it's just like NIMBYism, no sites available, manufacturing resurgence, and there's now more competition than ever for some of this real estate. And it's like things are taking longer and sometimes get delayed even further. And then when you get to permitting and approvals and all this other stuff, it adds even more time to it. So
yeah, I would. If you would have asked me 2 days ago, I might have, been a little more pessimistic about the IRA because we've been waiting for some guidance. But yesterday, actually, breaking news. I don't know, the Congress and Treasury, everybody's been busy this week. It's been wonderful weather in DC, so people have been energized or something. But Treasury released some good guidance for the community solar sector, for some other sort of small developers, that gives us confidence that there's, at least on the electrification credits start to go into effect in 2024. I think those are, close to being implemented. But on the solar side, we've been sort of waiting. So we're excited that we're going to get some implementation. And, things aren't perfect, but they are really trying to target smaller solar projects, which are good for grid resilience in that, it's a new segment that they're trying to target. So we're feeling that there's movement in the IRA that's going to get implemented. I mean, I think if the president wants to run, that's going to be a signature package. And so I do think that if the president wants to run on a, policy background, that should be a big thing they want to implement before, the next 2 or 3 quarters. So we're optimistic about that. But I mean, we also, in my world, we're thinking about the utilities, not for permitting, but, for the customer, right? So we're in this business of building new innovation, new business models on top of what's been regulated a monopoly. And so that's really, when I think about government, we're a little less about permitting. We're more thinking about, what's the utility going to do in the future? How is the utility going to be a competitor, a friend, a foe? Where do they go in this new decentralized microgrid world? And I think there's a lot to be written and unknown about what happens in 20 years. You have to invest in transmission, like Yuri was saying. There's going to be more microgrids, like Jason was saying. And so what does the utility do with that information? Because they're private businesses that have, dividends they need to pay to shareholders. And so I do think like that's what I'm macro trend, wondering what will happen, because I think it has to be a new reaction that we don't necessarily know what will happen with sort of utilities in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Interesting. Yeah. And Jason, how are you thinking about government and its role, pros, cons, etc.?
Look, we've spent at Grain a lot of time going to the weeds to educate and help our project developers understand what's possible. I'm going to highlight 3 key things. So first of all, within the Department of Energy right now, it's important for listeners in particular that are interested in removals. 1, check out cdrlaunchpad.org. This is an initiative to drive all countries to support at least 1 carbon removal project by 2025. And the DOE has a carbon negative shot that they put in place, essentially to focus on community and social engagement and innovation through deployment. That's the first avenue. What DOE is doing continues to impress me, and I continue to follow them closely. Now, if you think about nature-based solutions and you break it down even further, you've got monetization for 45Q credits. This is focused on carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and they've actually can lower thresholds substantially for capturing CO2 to allow different groups to get access to these incentives and to scale projects forward. Lastly, which is certainly not least, within the USDA, you have the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They're allocating $20 billion over 5 years for climate smart agriculture through a number of conservation programs. It gets kind of sticky, but the key is to really be able to break it down and understand based on where you are, what state you're in. Obviously, I'm in New York State. These buildings behind me, they're encouraged by local laws 94 and 97. New York's got a state scoping plan. So if you can leverage the incentives within the IRA and what your state is doing at a state level, there's a lot of really good stuff there. And let's face it, Ken, this is the stuff, especially for removals, that will act as the backstop to get letters of credit and to get pre-purchases and to get debt and equity. It's critical, and this is the optimal time to allow this to start flowing and to really scale out. And hopefully innovation and permitting continue to get prioritized in the House, and we can really reduce some of those lead times, because it's very, very difficult to accelerate this space and achieve our mandates with some of the headaches we have around permitting and financing. So those are some of the nuggets that I've captured, but I'm very encouraged, and I maintain an intellectually pessimistic, but the optimistic willpower is there for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Yuri, talk a little bit about some recent activity on your end, right? An exciting new partnership with Google, acquisition of Trajectory, fill us in on some of this stuff. I mean, some of it's more advisory and supporting of big companies like Google's, and some of it's on your own, right? Taking over, building and scaling.
Yeah, they're kind of one and the same. So most of the projects and portfolios that we buy, we will, and a project is not all that different than real estate. A project initially is basically site control and some permitting and some lease, right? Some lease options. We'll energize. Well, first we'll construct, and then we'll finance, then we'll construct, and then we'll develop and own projects. And we'll sell the power from those projects, the renewable energy, to our big customers like Google and Microsoft. So a big part of what we're focused on right now is executing on the mandates that we have in place with our customers, and doing so with integrity. A lot of the work I alluded to earlier with the communities, that's part of who we are. So we have a whole impact team at Sol that focuses on investing in the communities around our projects. And it's one of the things that we think differentiates our company. And so when we go to a customer and we announce a partnership with them, it's generally because we've designed something specific around collaboration to invest in those communities. We think, I believe that, we're not going to succeed as an industry unless we do that. So we're doing a lot of that. We're moving into doing a lot of agrivoltaics, which is growing actually like farmland or cultivating agriculture underneath their solar panels. I was just actually talking to a team about that recently. That's part of innovation as well, figuring out how to maintain the land use. A lot of resistance to renewable energy is around sort of historical use of land and changing that into what feels like an industrial use of land. So how do you build a hybrid there? That's really critical. And then a big part, and we're working in concert with Arcadia on this, is figuring out how individual homeowners can go 100% renewable, and maybe how we can work with our partners to do that more effectively and at scale. So you or I, we get an electric bill. How do we ensure the electricity we have is from renewable energy resources? And so we'll be launching something like that in the next few months. And as I said, Arcadia is a partner with us on that.
That's great. That's amazing. Yeah, and Kate, data, right? I mean, what are you hearing from your private sector clients and friends and colleagues? I mean, where do you see your growth happening in terms of responding to what you're hearing from other, private sector companies?
Yeah, so what's really neat is, on our data platform side, so we're a data platform means we basically are able to connect with 10,000 utilities around the world. And so we're taking, consumption data from customers globally. And we also have the largest database of tariff data, so rate data. So the key components of what we can offer another business is consumption and rate data about energy. And that can really be used in a lot of ways, which is what I love about Arcadia is we see things coming in all different parts of that kind of decarbonization eco chain. So we're seeing our largest huge growth right now in carbon accounting, which is, maybe not a surprise. It's in the newspaper all the time, but companies want to measure their carbon footprint, both because, there's some regulation coming in the EU, but also I do think it's like a genuine, desire now to sort of go more sustainable, measure their footprint. And they need energy data to do that. So that's a huge growth we're seeing is really in the commercial carbon accounting space, people wanting access to their actual energy data, because if you're a large corporation, you don't have one utility bill you have to measure. You might have 100,000 around the world. And so those types of problems are really helped with, access to energy data, consumption data. We're seeing a lot in the EV sector, right? So car manufacturers want to build really neat apps for their consumers. I mean, we're talking about retrofitting. We have to retrofit consumer behavior from gallon of gas price to kilowatt hour price. And there's a whole host of things that come with that. How much does it cost to charge my car? Is it going to be more expensive when I go EV? Is there an optimal time to charge? These types of problems are consumer. You have to teach the consumer all that. Yeah. So, huge EVs. Solar proposal, we lots going on in the solar industry. So what I'm hopeful for is, the sea is rising. That's a bad analogy in this room, but the pie for clean tech, I just feel in all sectors is really coming alive in a way that feels new, feels different than a couple of years ago.
Yeah. A rising tide lifts all.
A rising tide, yeah, it does hit a little differently in this group, but yes.
Jason, you spent some time overseas, right? I mean, what have you seen overseas? Who's doing it better? What other countries, right? I mean, talk a little bit. This is not a United States problem. This is a truly global problem. Like, what's our role as a country leading on these issues, and where are we falling behind? Who's doing it better? Who's ahead of the curve?
It's a question that I often think about, and I continue. One of the things I'm blessed with is having and maintaining great relationships with folks in the space all over the world, and having regular conversations with those people to figure out how do we provide optimal support, especially on the back of what's happening in the US. And to just kind of supplement what we continue to hear and what Kate touched on, one of the biggest things I realized overseas was, and this was pre-pandemic, was really the role supply chains play. Mm-hmm. If you think about scope 1 to scope 3 emissions, one area I spent a lot of time was really on the role of insetting. And for those who aren't familiar with insetting, it's become a hotter term as of late. It's really the financing of climate protection projects along a company's own value chain. And you have to demonstrate that you're reducing or sequestering emissions, and thereby you get a positive impact for the communities. And I think that for me, Ken, what was really eye-opening was, number one, the companies that were stepping forward and creating Planet Society barometers early on and have continued to stand by that and stay active around the UN Sustainable Development Goals and really show those real things. But one surprise too that I don't think a lot of people realize is, and it's not surprise to me that the UAE is hosting COP28. When I lived, Dubai was one of the first places I lived back in 2011, 2012. And they were starting to invest in renewable projects at that time. A lot of these countries had handshake agreements with entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders in the community. So how do you get people to stay and do great work? So I think the UAE with early innings, obviously with Masdar City, created, and other countries followed suit to create funds to invest in projects. I looked at infrastructure projects when I took on Terminal 1, and I remember going to Germany and Korea and Singapore and looking at the infrastructure and some of the energy reduction mandates that were in place. So there's certainly a variety of countries that you could pull to, but they all look to the US for guidance, certainly. And they're all looking to follow on ways that we're working here. And it's not anymore. We went from the a just-in-time supply chain to now a just-in-case supply chain, being smarter on how we manage it and having kind of this whole sustainalytics viewpoint. And it goes again to what Kate said. It's going to be more and more critical to leverage data and to understand where parts are being sourced from. And that includes critical materials and minerals. And I could talk at volume about some of the stuff I saw related to the lithium ion battery transition, because Schneider is one of the largest producers in the world of UPSs. The last thing I just want to highlight is, to me, coming back full circle, Main Street ESG today very much resembles the growth of where we saw financial disclosures and accounting back when FDR really stood up the SEC. That's kind of what I see happening. I've had this discussion in South America and in Europe a number of times. And look, Ken, being in Europe and being in Paris during the agreements was really important, but it was a lot of talking, and we need more and more execution. And I think what Egypt missed in COP27 was really walking the talk around setting up microgrids on premise, leveraging best practices to pull people in and out, and then ensuring we're executing and implementing best practices and really understanding what a circular economy is. I think that was a critical component. I went to so many places in Africa that understood how to leverage the outputs for the inputs and create economic opportunities and incentives. So those are some nuggets, but it's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, Yuri, Kate, I mean, overseas, any other kind of innovations you're seeing that need to be accelerated in the United States? Anyone else kind of, walking that talk, like Jason mentioned, Yuri?
We're domestic.
Yeah.
I think I would love to be overseas someday, but we focus exclusively on the United States. There's enough innovation here and enough opportunity here for us to do that. If I were doing carbon markets, I would be all over the place, because much of the work in carbon markets is taking place and needs to take place in other countries.
Yeah.
Certainly from our clients, we hear there is a gap, and a pretty important gap, in their ability to procure renewable energy in other countries. We have a pretty sophisticated infrastructure here with a lot of sophisticated companies, but if much of your footprint, whether that's scope 2 or scope 3, scope 2 being your direct emissions, scope 3 being supply chain emissions, much of that exists in APAC and other parts of the world. And so anyone who's working there, I say, go get it, like, let me know how I can help.
Well, Kate, I think he's throwing it to you to go deal with it.
Yeah.
We are primarily US, although we have global data coverage, and so we do go to other countries. There is a lot of we're a venture-backed business, and so I'm interested in kind of have an ear to the ground of what startups are happening, and there is a lot of innovation in Europe. I'm not seeing as much funding in Europe, and so there's an interesting maybe tension of there's a lot of smaller, very innovative companies around microgrids and virtual power purchase agreements, or virtual power plants, excuse me, but they're not quite yet getting real revenue or traction. And so I don't know how that will all shake out, whether funds will go and fund in Europe, or whether some of those ideas come to the US. But that's just a little bit of a micro trend I think I see is the innovations there. The growth and the scale is still a little bit to come.
Sure. Amazing. Well, look, Jason, Yuri, Kate, thank you guys for all joining. Love chatting about this, and clearly, just like in this one conversation, we're going from finance, access to capital, to government, to overseas, to real challenges, but also real opportunities from employment, talent, investing, and job creation. So, you guys are at the forefront, so appreciate you guys taking the time. Appreciate everyone tuning in and watching. You can follow us at coffeewithken.com. We're also on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. We have our own coffee cups for next time we're in person, Yuri. And our next conversation is going to be on June 21st. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, and we're going to figure out if we're all doomed. So until then, hope you guys have a great day, and thanks for tuning in, everybody.